Well, there we are. That music means, of course, it is time for the Sunday sermon. And it's fair to say that there's quite a lot gone on this week that's wound me up. And I want to focus on the extraordinary, appalling behaviour of government, of big business, of the establishment. This sort of groupthink in so many walks of life, and the growing rift between them and ordinary people. And in a sense, if we don't think as the establishment thinks, then woe betide us. What really makes me furious, sick with anger, is how out of touch they are. This is the week when the former boss of NatWest Bank, the disgraced Dame Alison Rose, who had to leave for breaching multiple rules and regulations within the banking industry with regard to Nigel Farage and breaking client confidentiality. She got a £2.4 million payoff. And this is after the board, first of all, tried to keep her, and then having to have a midnight board meeting when they realised they'd got that wrong, they let her resign rather than be fired, despite her multiple breaches, for which any normal employee of NatWest would have been fired without any payoff. So now the board themselves have actually approved £2.4 million, chaired, of course, by Howard Davis. And I think it's fair to say, as far as I'm concerned, that they've got this completely wrong, completely out of touch, and the whole board should resign, led by that chairman, Howard Davis. They shouldn't have kept her on and tried to keep her on in the first place. And then they got rid of her, but they deliberately allowed her to resign rather than fire her. And of course, 39% of that 2.4 million is our taxpayers' cash. You couldn't believe it. You can't make this stuff up. And of course, what goes on is that there's a great merry-go-round amongst the establishment. They sit on various boards of each other's companies. They sit on the FTSE 100 and 250 boards. Now look, I've been a chief exec of a big listed multinational business. I know how these things work. And let me tell you that if I had done what she did, the board of directors that I reported to, the non-execs, they would have fired me and there would have been absolutely zero payoff. That was a properly run business with successful people who knew the difference between right and wrong. I'm afraid in NatWest's case, they've just got on their board a bunch of yes men and women, a bunch of non-entities, no integrity, no principle, protecting their own. And you just get this cosy merry-go-round of jobs amongst the boards, the quangos, the universities, no accountability, no responsibility. Makes me absolutely sick. And then let's just move on to the next part of groupthink that the establishment insists that we obey them on. Net zero. I mean, just how difficult it is to have a rational, sensible debate about net zero, because, of course, even though it's harming and damaging financially ordinary people up and down the country, this has been imposed on us by governments and big business. Again, totally out of touch to the real cause and pain that is being inflicted. And be under no illusion, I believe that this is the greatest financial negligence that the government has imposed on its people as long as we can remember, and that it will damage this once mighty nation. A huge act of self-imposed self-harm. Again, it makes me sick with anger. And the groupthink of climate change. Now, look, we all know the climate's always changed. It always will. But I have some good news here. You won't hear this from the establishment, will you? No. No, the good news is, and this is backed up by data, folks, yes, in the United States, this is a normal year for heat. In Australia, the Great Barrier Reef continues its recovery to record levels. Oh, and by the way, weather disasters are not up in the last 20 years. And here's some extraordinary data I discovered yesterday that no one else will tell you about from the establishment. Amongst all the scaremongering this summer about fires, and tragically, yes, people have died. but so many have been caused by arson. But here's the real data, and this comes from the EU's own data set, Copernicus it's called. In the United States, the burnt area of fires this year is down, on the average, the 10-year average, by 1.5 million hectares. It's down in Europe by 4 million hectares. But you don't hear that good news on the groupthink of mainstream media. And that infuriates me, absolutely infuriates me, as did, of course, the groupthink of COVID lockdowns when they turned out to be wrong. Have you heard anybody in the establishment or the government apologise, admit they got it wrong? When you look at Sweden, and actually they had the courage and that turned out to be right. Just extraordinary. Likewise, the groupthink of masks that we were told we had to wear and would make a huge difference, and actually it turned out they made no difference whatsoever. And yet, have you heard anybody apologise from the establishment, from the government about it? No. Big business, of course, made huge sums of money. This is the thing. They cannot admit when they got it wrong. And yet any of us that dared challenge any of this stuff, whether it be climate change, whether it be net zero, whether it be COVID lockdowns, masks, we get smeared, we get labelled, we get put down, we get followed. Yes, we get sort of checked up and monitored on social media by nudge units and things within government. And goodness me, the groupthink of being told, of course, that the vaccines would stop transmission and stop infection. Turned out that wasn't true either. And yet we were smeared and labelled if we said, actually, young people didn't need to get the vaccine. All of this groupthink from the establishment makes me absolutely sick with anger. It's just unbelievable. The failure to accept that actually, sadly, in some cases, tragically, some people have been harmed by these jabs, people who didn't need to take it. And yet no apology, no discussion, no responsibility. Absolutely makes me steaming mad. Oh, and there's another one of groupthink within the establishment and big business. Yes, big pharma. I tell you what, I'm going to be talking in the third hour of the show about the confusion surrounding what is actually a Nobel Prize winning drug called ivermectin. I've talked about it before. I mean, the smearing and the labelling that went on, if anybody suggested that it might possibly work for the treatment of COVID, I don't know if it does or it doesn't. But we weren't even allowed really to have a proper discussion. You will not want to miss the extraordinary things that have happened in courts of appeal in Malaysia and the United States of America this month. Quite extraordinary. And you sometimes wonder, maybe you just follow the money. And then, of course, the other big thing this week, ULEZ. The ULEZ expansion kicks in next week here in London. It turns out that once again, Mayor Khan, he's been caught out, fiddling the figures, fudging the data, pressurising experts to try and change reports to suit his own narrative, this groupthink narrative about air pollution. And of course, anybody that wants to challenge the ULEZ extension, if we dare to challenge him, then we're labelled as killers, conspiracy theorists, far-right, anti-vaxxers. And then it turns out that actually the mayor just doesn't like white Londoners. We're not real Londoners if we're white. No. So there we are, the evidence from his own team. He's created a culture in his own team that actually, you know, if you're white, you're not a real Londoner. And now we read this weekend with an expose in the Mail on Sunday, it turns out that there is clear evidence from documents that have been leaked that yes, Transport for London, under the leadership of Mayor Khan, is planning pay per mile charging. Now you might think if you're outside London, that's not coming to a town or a street or a city near you. I've got news for you. It starts in London and it ripples around. And again, he's denied it, but here's the evidence. So it turns out, and this is tough, but I'm going to say it anyway, that Mayor Khan has been found out this week just to be a lying, corrupt racist. That is the reality of the Mayor of London. And it makes me sick to the core with fury at what he thinks of Londoners, those who are least well off, the poorest in London, those who happen to have white skin. And of course, this actually started back when I and anybody else who dared to promote Brexit years ago, if we challenged the establishment groupthink, then of course we were labelled as bigots, racists, instead of actually people who believed in our country and the proud, great brilliance of Britain, who believed that we should be an independent, sovereign nation, who believed that actually we should be proud of the courage of Churchill, proud of our heritage and our history. No, we weren't allowed to do that. And it still goes on. This is the groupthink thinking, and it makes me absolutely steaming mad. And today, whatever you do, try and get hold of a copy of an article, a comment piece in the Sunday Telegraph by Simon Heffer, a very established columnist, and he writes that when institutions fail so widely, then anarchy is close behind. Only serious leadership, he writes, and the swift removal of the incapable are going to rectify that. But here's the point. We're not seeing much evidence of the swift removal of the useless, woeful board of directors of NatWest. Everybody else, executives in the NHS clinging on to their jobs, despite what went on, the horrors at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Where's the accountability? Where's the sense of responsibility within these institutions? But let me finish this sermon with some hope. And my goodness, we need some hope. We see you in the establishment. We see this groupthink in big business, in big government, in big pharma. And we, the people, ultimately will have our say. And that is the message of hope. And with that, here endeth my Sunday sermon.